I want to talk about a Bible expression tonight that I am almost 100% confident that you have never, ever used in a normal daily conversation. Now, you might guess about a lot of such expressions because the Bible, especially when we're looking to the King James Version of the Bible, some of those old expressions in the King James Version are archaic and we don't use them anymore. And this is one of those. I want to talk with you for a few minutes tonight about filthy lucre. Now, I'd be glad if I don't typically ask for a show of hands. I wouldn't, but if anybody has ever used the expression filthy lucre in a normal conversation, you'd be free to welcome to raise your hand at this time. I see one hand. Okay. Filthy lucre. What about filthy lucre? You know that is a King James expression. It's only used 5 times, even in the King James translation of the Bible. Interestingly, all 5 of those times is in the broader context of elders and deacons and their qualifications and their work. I thought that was kind of interesting, that those are the only times that expression is used. Other versions, newer English translations, would use the expression dishonest gain. Now, the word lucre itself just basically means money. Filthy lucre means dirty money. Dishonest gain is the way that most newer English translations would convey that. Obviously, elders and deacons, all Christians for that matter, must not seek after filthy lucre or dishonest gain. And again, that's where that expression is typically used in the New Testament. We're not going to talk about elders and deacons and their qualifications of work tonight. We're going to talk about filthy lucre, because not only elders and deacons, but all of us need to be on guard about the dangers of dishonest gain and the temptations presented to us in that way. And so that'll be our study tonight. Stop here just briefly to thank you for being here. We've had a beautiful Lord's Day in Middle Tennessee. And I want to just take a minute to especially commend our young people who spent the entire afternoon out and about helping some of the widow women, raking leaves at their houses and visiting and cheering everybody up. And I'm just very encouraged by your selflessness and your involvement in that. Thanks to all the young people who did that. I got to also thank the adults who spearheaded that effort and coordinated it and carried them from place to place, and it's just a very good thing. And I want to commend all of you who were involved in that on this beautiful Lord's Day that we've been enjoying. What about filthy lucre? That's the question that we want to ask and try to answer from the Bible. And the first observation that we have to make is that money is a morally neutral substance. It's used as a tool. Obviously, we have money. I'm satisfied that almost everybody here tonight has, at probably within arm's reach, maybe in your back pocket like I do, a wallet. It's got some money in it. Maybe not a lot of money, but you got some money. We have money. We use money to purchase goods and services. Money in and of itself is not a bad thing. So lucre, if you will, lucre by itself is neither righteous nor evil. As I was trying to think of something that would sort of illustrate that money per se is not a bad thing, it made me think of the text that Logan read for us a few minutes ago from Deuteronomy chapter 28. We're not going to take time to read all that. I have part of it here on the screen. But God said that He was going to shower material blessings upon the Israelites when they went into the land of promise. If they would obey Him and do His will and be faithful to Him, He was going to reward them with material prosperity and abundance. Read a little bit of that again here in Deuteronomy 28, beginning verse 1. It shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and do all His commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all the nations. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, blessed shalt thou be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of the ground, and the fruit of thy cattle, and the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. Blessed shall be thy basket and thy store. The Lord shall command the blessing upon thee in thy storehouses, and all that thou settest thy hand to do. Well, if money was intrinsically bad and evil, God would not have promised to shower the Israelites with all this sort of material abundance if they would serve Him faithfully as they entered into the land of promise. And so I think just the conclusions that we can reach reasoning along that line is that money itself is morally neutral. It's neither good nor bad. But money can become filthy. Lucre can become filthy lucre in at least three ways that I can think of. It becomes filthy lucre. One way is if it's gained in an evil manner. I think that would be pretty obvious. Money can be evil if I go about to get it in some way that is sinful. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "A false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is His delight." Think about the picture here of a false balance. We know that back in that day, if you went to buy something that was measured in volume or weight, the way they would do that, they didn't have prepackaged stuff like we have. And so if I wanted to buy, I don't know, maybe I want to buy a pound of butter. And so maybe this store, typically I think people would make their own butter back in those days, but let's say that this guy actually has butter for sale, and you want a pound of butter. He would put a pound weight on one side of the balance scale, and then he would put butter on the other side until it balanced out, right? And so here's the thing though, if this weight that he's using was somehow, altered, it was phony, so that it was lighter than a pound. It really didn't weigh a pound. Maybe instead of 16 ounces, it weighed 14 ounces. And so the thing would balance out. I would think I'm getting a pound's worth of goods, when the fact of the matter is that he's cheating me, because the weight that he's using on his balance scale is not a just weight. That's what is referred to here as a just weight. A just weight is His delight, but a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. Why would a guy do that? Why would a guy have phony weights in his business where he's selling things by weight and volume? Why would he have a faulty weight? Because he's going to make a little bit more on the proposition, right? As this exchange goes down, he makes a little more than he would have made otherwise. And so it's dishonest gain. And as I suggest to you, that would be one of the ways that you would make money an evil thing, filthy lucre. I would suggest to you also that money becomes evil, it becomes filthy lucre, if it's used for evil purposes. We can do a lot of good with money, and people do a lot of good with money. There are people who are philanthropists, and they give huge sums of money to worthy causes. But even for those of us who are not wealthy people, we can do good with the money that we have, and that's fine. That's the way it ought to be. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I'm going to tell you, money can be used to do a lot of evil as well. And you know that for sure. You can spend money on all kinds of bad things. You can buy and do bad things with money, and it becomes filthy lucre when it's used in that fashion. In Luke chapter 16, do you remember the parable that Jesus told about the unjust steward? There was a certain man, Luke 16 verse 1, which had a steward. Now obviously the steward was a man who was in charge of his business. Other newer English translations, instead of steward there, use the word manager. He was the man's manager. And the same was accused unto him that he had noticed. He had wasted his goods. So here's a guy who's being dishonest with his master's money or his master's things. He was supposed to be a good manager, but he wasn't. He was evil. He was wicked. And the man called this wicked steward and said to him, "How is it that I hear this of thee? Give account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest no longer be steward." And the parable goes on, and there's some really interesting lessons to be learned from that parable. But our point is just, here's a case, an exact example of a man who used money in evil ways. And for him, it was filthy lucre. It would be the same when anyone acts in that same sort of manner today. So money is certainly not in and of itself evil, but it can become evil if it's gained in the wrong way, if it's used in the wrong way. And then, real importantly, money can become filthy lucre if it's allowed to take the place of God in our hearts. I would argue, and I think you probably agree with me, that for us, for those of us who are assembled here tonight, these first two ways, I don't think that that's probably a huge, terrible temptation for us. I mean, we got to be on guard against all sins. But I don't think that we're horribly tempted to go out and do something evil to gain money. And we try to be very careful how we use our money, that we would not put it to evil purposes. But I'm going to tell you, right here, I think is where the greatest temptation is, if we allow money to take the place of God in our hearts. This can happen. It can happen easily. It can happen almost without us knowing it. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 26, you remember, this is a very famous quote from the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. Notice, you cannot serve God and mammon. Emphasis on it can't be done. You cannot serve God and mammon. So if I can't be devoted to both at an equal level. I can't say, well, I'm going to serve God, but I'm also going to serve money and making money and having money and spending money. You can't; those can't be your masters. You will love one and hate the other, or hate the one and love the other. And typically what happens is God ends up being hated and money being loved. You cannot. It doesn't say it'll be hard, you're going to have a challenge, it'll be difficult. No, it says it's just not possible. You cannot serve God and mammon. And so I would argue that money, though neutral in itself, neither good or bad in and of itself, it can become filthy in the ways that we have just suggested. I want to just spend a minute more emphasizing this last point, allowing money to take the place of God in our hearts. And I want to suggest to you a thing that we have emphasized many times through the years, and that is that covetousness is a huge, huge problem for us. Right? There are a lot of warnings about covetousness in the Word of God. Those warnings were typically received by people who were a lot less tempted than we are. Because we are, without a doubt, and by any measure that you care to apply, we are the richest people, on average, the richest people who've ever lived in the history of time. And so, dealing with money and the challenges of money and materialism and covetousness, that's a huge problem for us. It's always a problem. For all people, it's a problem. But it's a particular problem for us because of the very rich times in which we live. It's a true danger to us. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, the Apostle Paul says, put to death what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness. Notice he says, which is idolatry. The New American Standard Version there says, greed, which amounts to idolatry. So maybe that's a synonym, another word that helps us grasp the meaning of this idea of covetousness. Because again, I think that's a word that we probably don't use very often. But we do talk about being greedy. We talk about greed, and that's a close synonym to the word covetousness. And notice, greed can amount to idolatry. Idolatry is something that we worship instead of God, something that we make as our God, something that we devote ourselves to. So if we devote ourselves to money, to material prosperity, and if that's our prime objective, if that's what we pursue above anything else, then he says that amounts to idolatry. Let me ask you this. Would you go out in the garage? Gordon's got a lot of woodworking tools. Maybe we'll go over to Gordon's house and he'll help us. We're going to construct an idol. It's not going to be a great big idol. It's not going to be like Nebuchadnezzar's idol. We don't have any place to put something that big. But we're going to make an idol. Maybe we'll make it about 3 feet tall. We're going to make it out of wood, but we're going to try to be very fancy with this thing and carve it out ornately. And then maybe we'll even spend a bit of money, and we're going to ordain this with gold and jewels and certain trinkets that cost some money, and we're going to dress this thing up pretty fancy. And then we're going to put it in a significant place in our houses, and we're going to, when we go by there, we're going to actually stop and bow down to that idol at regular times throughout the day. Anybody tempted to do that? I think we're all saying, are you crazy? That's just ridiculous. I wouldn't do that in a million years. There's literally nothing that appeals to me about that sort of a scenario. I wouldn't do that for anything. So I'm not tempted with idolatry, right? Here's the temptation, though. Greed or covetousness, which it can be like idolatry to us. We're not tempted to use graven images, but we are tempted with covetousness and greed, and we have to be really, really careful about that. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning verse 7, we brought nothing into this world. It is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that, notice this, they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, to many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. There's the same word, right? Coveted, covetousness. But, and we've pointed this out plenty of times, but it's just got to be remembered. It's not just rich people who are in danger here. It's those who want to be rich. You could be penniless and still have this problem if your ultimate desire is to be rich and you have the love of money. That's the problem. It's not money per se. It's not how much money per se. It's our attitude toward money. And certainly, I think we have to be fully aware that this is a great danger to us. You know, it's not. We cannot excuse ourselves by saying, "Well, I'm not rich. I'm not a rich person." Fact of the matter is, of course, we really are, right? We really are rich people in comparison to most everybody else who lives everywhere else. Wayne tells us about people over in Ghana that he knows and corresponds with on a regular basis. And actually, we've just recently had the opportunity, I'm not saying we had the opportunity to help one of the preachers we're supporting. He got kicked out of the house he was living in. If any of you read the reports back there, the man in Ghana that we support, Felix, he got kicked out of the house that he was living in, renting, and he had to find some other place. And the standard operating procedure over there is you pay your rent 2 years in advance. That's right, isn't it, Wayne? 2 years. And he didn't have the money. He had no place to live with his family. And so we were able to send him $600. $600 would pay him ahead 2 years in his rent so that he could get into a new place. Now, I think we'll try to keep you updated on that. That circumstance may be changing a little bit, but that just tells you something about our wealth compared to those people, our wealth compared to other people in other parts of the world. And so we've got to be really on guard toward covetousness, which is a huge problem. It's filthy lucre. It's evil if we allow it to take the place of God in our hearts and we be guilty of the sin of covetousness. I just thought I'd maybe branch out just with some additional lucre-related questions, money questions, just some things that always come up. We're talking about money and using money. One of the questions that people sometimes ask is, does the Bible condemn savings? Is it wrong to have savings? Can you have a bank account with some money stored up in a bank account? Can you have some investments? You've got a little bit of money and you've put it in a place where hopefully the money will grow. Is it wrong to have investments? Is it wrong to have a retirement account or a 401k? What about things like that? Is it wrong to try to save for a potential rainy day? You know, is it wrong to have a rainy day fund? Is it wrong to have something set aside so that someday you might be able to retire? Are those kind of things wrong? I want to suggest to you that the Bible, I think, clearly says it's not wrong to have savings like that. Proverbs 21:20, there is treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. Another translation said, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp them down. And so this is actually saying that it's a worthy thing to store up some things, to have some things saved back. For them, when you think about treasure, which might be literal monetary thing, gold or silver that they might, but even oil, in the sense that oil was a valuable commodity. But he's saying that's a desirable thing. A wise person will have some things stored up. But a foolish man, just as soon as he gets it, he spends it. So this is saying that it's a noble thing to actually save up some. And so I think clearly the Bible would not condemn the idea of saving. Some savings is a good thing. It's a worthy thing. Not condemned in the Bible. Is it okay? Another question that comes up about money, is it okay to incur debt? So someone says, the old car I'm driving is just on its last legs. I'm telling you what, I'm not sure I get home tonight before the wheel will fall off and I'll be stuck by the side of the road. My car is in terrible shape, but I just don't have enough money to go out and get a better one. And the only way I'm going to be able to afford that is if I go to some company, that the bank or some other financial institution that loans money for cars, and take out a loan so that I can get better transportation. I need transportation. Would I be sinning if I borrowed money to remedy that situation? Like my car is on its last legs. Certainly, we think about buying a house, and most of us are not able to buy a house without borrowing money to be able to do it. So you take out a mortgage, you take out a loan. Is that wrong? I'll tell you another way that people incur a lot of debt in our day and time is medical expenses. So you need some kind of a medical treatment, but it's going to cost a whole lot of money, and you don't have great insurance, and so a lot of that's going to be on you. Maybe I better not take that treatment, because the only way I could take that treatment is to run up some debt, some medical debt. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'm not qualified. Maybe it would be wrong for me to accept the medical treatments if I can't just pay cash up front. Is it wrong to incur debt? That's the question. Now, the things that we've just been mentioning are, I think, sort of common things, but we know that this is sort of a two-sided coin. I don't think, and we're going to argue for this in just a minute, I don't think it's wrong to borrow for things that are very much necessities. I would argue there's a difference between borrowing for necessities and borrowing for frivolous things. And people certainly spend a lot of money on frivolous things. And we hear all the time about how consumer debt in our country is just off the charts. People running up their charge cards for things that they don't need, things that they just want to enjoy. And so I would argue there's a difference between running up debt for legitimate matters and then just frivolousness or wastefulness. I think that'd be maybe a whole nother thing to investigate. But look at Exodus 22. In Old Testament times, God understood that there would be situations where people would have to borrow money and others would lend to them. In Exodus 22, beginning verse 25, if thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a user, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, thou shalt deliver it unto him by the time the sun the sun goeth down, for that is his covering only, it is his raiment for his skin, wherein shall he sleep? And it shall come to pass when he crieth unto me that I will hear, for I am gracious. God says if you become an oppressive lender, you take a guy's coat as collateral against the money that you loan him, God says you give that back to him before the day ends, because that's what he's got to have to be warm tonight when he sleeps. And if you don't do that and he cries out, I will hear him, and I will hear him in regards to the fact that you have been oppressive toward him. But I'm just saying this to say that it was understood. Sometimes people are in situations and circumstances where they must borrow money. It's not sinful. But I think the scriptures would also tell us, be careful in that matter. If you're in a situation where you have to borrow money and incur debt, be careful in that. Sort of a famous expression in Proverbs 22, verse 7. The rich ruleth over the poor. The borrower is servant to the lender, or other versions say the borrower is slave to the lender. And so if you are the borrower and you're the one who's incurring debt, know that the one who lent you that money has a position of superiority over you. You have put yourself in a less than favorable relationship. It's not totally a good thing to your advantage. So just be careful about incurring debt. So I don't think it's wrong to have savings, and I don't think it's wrong to incur debt for reasonable things. Here's a question that comes up from time to time. What about bankruptcy? So we're talking about lucre questions, money questions, and how we use money. What about bankruptcy? I got to tell you right up front that I claim no expertise whatsoever in legal matters that pertain to bankruptcy. There's lots involved in that, and I understand that. But I would argue that the overriding principle of God for us in this is this simple statement, Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrow and payeth not again. To pay not again is a wicked thing. If you borrow, pay it back. That's the bottom line consideration, I think, from God. I know that there are different types of bankruptcies. There are some kinds of bankruptcies where you just walk away from your debts and you're allowed to do so through a legal process. There are other kinds of bankruptcy proceedings that basically what you're asking for is more time to be able to pay the debts that you owe. In other words, you're not going to be able to get it done in the allotted time that's been provided, but you're asking for additional time. So I know that there are different kinds of bankruptcies, but I believe that the bottom line for us, as we're seeking to please God, is pay your debts. Romans chapter 13, verse 8 says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth hath fulfilled the law of God." So, owe no man anything. Notice that expression. Now, someone may have a question here about this. I just said that you could take out a car loan or a house mortgage. Owe no man anything. Wait a minute. I owe the bank for the house. I've got a mortgage with the bank. Am I violating this principle? I think the answer to that is a fairly simple one. So when I take out a mortgage on the house, I have payments due at specific dates. Typically, most home mortgages would require you to make a monthly payment. And so if my payment is due on the first of the month, and I paid on the first of the month, and there's not another payment due until the first of next month, then I'm actually not owing. I'm current. I'm up to date. And if you ask the bank, is there any problem? Does he owe you money? No, he's current with us, right? That would be an answer they could give in that matter. So you would not be violating this statement if you were paying on time, paying your debts on time. If you weren't, and if you maybe weren't intending not to pay at all, then you'd have, I think, a problem with God's will in regards to how we use our money. Okay, so what about filthy lucre? I hope we've made some observations that are helpful to us. I want to end with just one simple exercise that probably we all need to spend more time thinking about, and that is, what would a budget look like if it was based on scriptural principles? So, it's good to have a budget. If you listen to Dave Ramsey on the radio, he said you better have a budget. If you don't have a budget, you end up spending more than you think you're spending. Get a budget, make a budget. Budgets are good things, worthy things, whether you actually sit down and write it out or whether at least you have it formulated in your mind. What would a budget look like based on scriptural principles? First of all, I think the top line on our budget is giving to the Lord. 2 Corinthians 9 verses 6 and 7 says we're not supposed to give grudgingly or necessity. God loveth a cheerful giver. This ought to be a top priority in our money affairs. That's budget item number one. Now, keep that in mind. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get a little later here. Secondly, necessities such as shelter, food, clothing for our family and our dependents. 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 says, if a man won't provide for his own, he's worse than an infidel. So I've got to see to it that my family is provided for. That's an important budgetary consideration. It's got to be way up there on the list of important things. Third, I would say obligations, things we promised to pay, because a Christian must keep his word. We were just talking about that. The wicked man borrows and pays not again. We can't have that sort of reputation. So we have obligated ourselves. I've got a car payment. I've got a house payment. I've got medical bills. Whatever it is, then I've got to put that at a reasonable spot in my budget considerations, because it's not just that they'll come after me if I don't pay. It's that God is not happy with me if I don't pay. And so that's got to be high up on my budgetary considerations. Number 4, savings, preparing for unknown future expenses. Unexpected things can happen. Funds for our old age when we're no longer able to work, a retirement, or making some plans for the future. If I spend everything I have right now, and I'm already at that point in time where, man, I'm looking ahead to the point where I'm not going to be able to work and earn a living. And if I've spent everything I've got right now, and I don't have anything laid up for a retirement of some sort, that's bad planning, right? At a very minimum, that's bad financial planning. So on our budget, we need to be thinking about that. You have known, as I have known, people who seem to make no thought for that, no thought about what's going to be the realities 20 years from today. There's some people who just, if they've got it, they spend it. That's not good thinking. I don't think that's even biblical thinking. I think God would have us make a better plan for the use of our money than that. I think on our budget list, certainly sharing with those who are less fortunate, or what we often refer to as benevolence. Galatians 6 verse 10 says we ought to do good unto all men. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do a good unto all men, especially those who are of the household of faith. It's talking about providing for physical needs. The scriptures say a lot about benevolence. And we ought to be a benevolently minded people, and we ought to be able to include that in our budgetary planning. The idea that when opportunities arise, we are able to share with those who are less fortunate. And then, finally, I think the extras come last. Notice, and a really emphasis here, the extras come last. I want to go on vacation. And the vacation that I have in mind, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be pretty expensive, actually, because I've got some real plans about what I would like to do on a vacation. But in order to go to these expenses of this vacation that I want to take, I can't give as much to the Lord. So I'm going to slight my commitment to give to the Lord generously, so that I can come down here and have a really nice vacation. Is there a problem with that? Well, there's a gross problem with that, right? That's a horrible problem, because I have forsaken the thing that ought to be first in order to accommodate the things that ought to be last in my budget. And so, again, I would just reference, all that we have said about, saving for a rainy day, sharing with others, but really especially giving to the Lord. Extras have to come last. We're blessed. I'm going to tell you, we are blessed people. We're able to do some of those extra things, aren't we? We don't do as much as some people do. We're not as wealthy as some people are, but we're able to get some of the extra things. In fact, the fact of the matter is we have a lot of extra things, but those have to come last. We should not forsake any of those higher budgetary priorities in order to get those extras. All right, just some thoughts about lucre, filthy lucre. J.D. said, I've got to talk to J.D. later. He said he actually used that in a common conversation, the expression filthy lucre. Money is not good or bad by itself, but it can be bad, and we've got to be on guard about how we use it. Thanks for listening. I hope it's been helpful. We're going to sing a song of invitation. As we sing this song, we'll be asking everybody, make sure your life is right with God. If we can help you in that regard in any way at all, let us know while we stand and sing this song.